Hello and welcome. It's time for another exciting review for the Magnus Protocol. I do have something I want to talk about with Magnus, specifically with Magnus Archives, but we'll talk about that after this. So last week I had a bunch of people telling me, well, drowning is not the vast, it's the buried. And so I did a bunch of digging, and I want to have a full discussion on that, so we'll pin that at the end of the episode. If that's all you care about, please jump ahead to that point. I'll put a timestamp in the description, but I want to talk about the episode first, and then we can get into my theories on like the difference between the vast and the buried when it comes to drowning and the weird intersection there that kind of gives me more ideas for protocol. Anyway, we'll get to that later. Our episode today is episode 16, Antisocial, and the classification is CAT 1RB156-301-02023-250-32024. Just, you know. Then it's tattoo influencer, in parentheses, hyphen, slash cardiac, which I assume is cardiac arrest, right? It's heart related. An arrest in a very different way here. Man, didn't even think about that. Okay. So just to start off, the dedication, how dare you? How dare you make me think about that letter? How dare you do that? I got PTSD from that letter. No, this is a really interesting one because we have Alice actually tells Sam and Celia what's going on, not just one of them separately, but tells them both, and they're both really receptive to it. Not just like to the idea, but they tell her, we don't think you're lying, and there was no beep. And Celia specifically is like, yeah, it's okay, which makes me think she's seen the supernatural before, which again leads me to believe this is the same Celia from Archives. However, Sam jokes about where they should classify it, and I'm wondering, I'm very curious if he didn't start trying to classify it for her, because later on the transcript specifically says that Gwen is looking into Sam's work. She's looking into what he was doing. Hopefully Sam didn't accidentally just tell Gwen everything that happened that way, but Gwen doesn't get very long to look at anyway. There's also something really interesting I want to mention. Alice mentions that she hopes she'd paid her horror dues working here. It could just be an offhand, hey, she's just, hoping that being exposed to all this weird stuff would have made it where she didn't have to be exposed to it in her actual life. But I'm still wondering if Alice doesn't know a lot more than she's letting on. Then there's the most interesting part of this early section of the episode, which is where Celia tells her there's plenty of horror to go around at the moment. And as she does, there's the sound of what almost sounds like a car going by, or maybe somebody breathing. And it's really hard to say which one it is. It could, of course, be Gwen coming into work, but we haven't heard a car driving by before. Perfect timing as I'm talking about cars driving by. The mail truck is here and my dogs are losing their minds. But we haven't heard that sound before in the background, or at least if we have, I didn't recognize it. I didn't notice it. So I thought that was really interesting when she says there's plenty of horror to go around. Just, ooh, okay. This case is terrifying. This case is tragic and sad, and not just because I could actually follow along with everything that Madam E was saying. That's not the only reason why it's very sad. But the real tragedy to it is that you can tell that Madam E kind of did have a thing for Inksole and was like, hey, we might be getting somewhere here. Gets a little too attached, sending the DMs, only for it to backfire. And there's just some little things here. The phrase of just, are you ready for your heart's desire? And it's the tattoo on the heart. And that's what, horrifying when you think about it. Either way, just something about the happy-go-lucky personality early on turning into what it does. Inksole with the spade in the cemetery and says, dig. That can't be an accident. Also, I thought at first this might be the same cemetery from episode 12, I believe it is, but it's not. The cemeteries are about 5.5 hours away from each other. But it would explain what Inksol was doing at that cemetery, which is digging up bodies that had tattoos, it seems like. Definitely more going on there. We now have like 3 big, they could be the villain of the season people, between Mr. Bonzo, Lady Mowbray, and Inksol. And it's really hard to say which one it's going to be. I feel like these will be returning, like, reoccurring characters, you know? But just that don't make me break your heart. Just, oh, that's exactly what happens. There's some nice little comments here, too, that got me thinking. The views cut her, she says. They cut her heart. Is that like the angles cut me when I think from Magnus Archives? What, 61, I think? Binary? I think that's what it was called. Sometimes when I think of an episode, it just comes right to me. Sometimes I cannot remember the episode number at all. I'm a failure as a person that likes to categorize things in their brain. But just immediately made me think of that. And then the fact that the heart just rips itself out. Whether it's the heart or it could be the tattoo of the heart ripping itself out and damaging the heart as it does, it's really hard to say. Oof. Just, that is a terrible way to die. And there's been a lot of death in this series. That is a terrible way to die. Then finally, I feel like I'm rushing through this one, but I'm really not. I'm just not explaining every little thing. I'm explaining all the things that stood out to me. Finally, for this case, earlier on in the case, when Madame E was talking about the damage that Inksol dragging her on social media has done, she says that, I don't know if you can see it, and like tries to show her heart tattoo to the camera, which means she talks about being like bees stinging her whenever she sees the bad comments. I think her heart's desire was social media fame, and that is exactly how Inksol broke that heart, is to twist that back around the other way. And just horrifying, right? Like, look, I don't have a lot of subscribers on YouTube or a lot of followers on Twitch. You know, we're a pretty small channel still, and we have a good time, myself and Rungren, but every once in a while I'll get a comment that's just like, oh man, you did not have to put it that way. I get what you're saying. I wish you'd worded that nicer. You might even be right, but ooh. And so I can't even imagine how much worse it is for Rusty Quill, for Jonathan Sims, but for Johnny. But this, I think, making it a physical thing that affects her, just, that's terrifying. Terrible way to die. Alone in a hospital bed, trying to make one last video to hopefully curtail some of the spite and some of the hatred. Terrifying. The last part of the episode here is Alice not liking that case at all, right? She's a little sensitive right now, understandably. And then everybody leaving with her, and then Gwen comes in and gets called into Lena's office. And Lena is furious. And there's a really interesting sound effect that happens here that at first I thought was just the music, but now I'm thinking, look, this is going to sound crazy. It almost sounds like a heartbeat. And Lena's office, when Lena's angry, the sound is just every couple seconds. I'm wondering if Lena is not tied to the office somehow, like intrinsically tied into the office somehow. And when she gets angry, the heart of the office, her office, the heart of the OIAR is physically changed because of it somehow. Just that music feels a little too on the nose for me for that to have just been a musical thing. Let me know your thoughts, because I'm really curious about that, what you think. But Lena chews her out, says, hey, how dare you bring an external here, which confirms to us that Mowbray is, in fact, it was almost positive last episode, but definitely confirms it here. Mowbray is an external. And one of Lena's big problems is that it exposed the staff, which I thought was really interesting, because, you know, Lena's come off very harsh often, but she does still care, even just to not have to replace the staff. She cares. Either way, Gwen does bring up a pretty good point of, you can't get mad at me for something you didn't tell me not to do. for something I wasn't trained not to do. I do think it was still incredibly reckless of Gwen. Now that we know that it's not that Mowbray arrived there, it's that Gwen invited her there, and Mowbray will come back for Celia at some point. Thanks, Gwen. But Lena at one point seems like she's going to fire Gwen, and Gwen fires back with that, hey, you didn't tell me I shouldn't do that. You didn't train me, and demands another case. And I think this is going to go very poorly for Gwen, but I will say I'm getting some John vibes from Gwen. Getting some archivist vibes from Gwen. This, no, I'm going to put my foot down. I'm a part of this. You can't take this away from me now. And the, hey, this work's got to get done, and nobody's out there working right now, and just saying, Gwen might wind up tied into the eye. Just saying. No, it's a really interesting episode. I think it does have a lot more questions that come from it. It doesn't really answer all that much. It answers a few. I especially want to know what Ink Soul's relationship is with the Buried because of Dig. It honestly could just be a red herring, but I don't think so. I think if it's a red herring, they were smiling when they wrote it, right? Because they know how much we all love Dig. But I worry that there's some other tie in there. Anyway, before we end this episode, let me talk a little bit about drowning. What a weird sentence. So, a lot of people last week said that I was wrong. Drowning is not the Vast. Drowning is the Buried. Specifically because Too Close I Cannot Breathe, right? So I did a lot of digging. I re-listened to some previous episodes. I re-listened to last week's episode. I re-listened to the Magnus Archives episodes 51 and 129. 51 being High Pressure, 129 being Submerged. Okay, so let's talk about it. Because this is a really weird relationship of the entities, of the fears, right? Drowning should, by all rights, be the Buried. It should. The Buried is about being suffocated, being crushed under the pressure, right? But High Pressure, episode 51 of the Magnus Archives, involves Simon Fairchild, who is an avatar of the Vast. And drowning is a big thing there because the water that goes on forever that's coming in. However, in 129, Submerged, Buried is the big thing there, being crushed under the water and it seeping in and leaving you nowhere to escape because of the rain that's coming in. But there's two phrases that the statement giver gives in 129. One is that the water has stretched out to the horizon, which is clearly talking about the Vast. And the other is that the world was sinking, which is clearly talking about the Buried. Then you have the fact that the Buried's ritual was stopped. This is huge spoilers. The Buried's ritual was stopped by Gertrude cutting up Jan Kilbride, who was touched by the Vast, and throwing him into the Buried. I think, it's just theory, that drowning has always been a weird special case where the Vast and the Buried meet. And I think that is what we have going on right now in the Magnus Protocol. Some people in the comments were telling me, yeah, it's absolutely the Vast. Some people in the comments were telling me, yeah, it's absolutely the Buried. But I think it's where the two cross that should not cross. And I think that's what we're seeing in most of the episodes here. Two aspects that have met that normally wouldn't be. And I think that's where we get a lot of the confusion in the previous episodes of, I'll say, well, this feels like the Stranger with the congregation, right? This feels like the Stranger. They're almost human, but not. And then other people said, well, it feels like the Buried because she gets crushed. Could be a weird combination of the Stranger and the Buried where normally that wouldn't happen, right? I know there's going to be some of you that are just like, oh, he's just trying to make up for saying it was the Vast. But I really do think drowning is a special edge case. that I think ties into exactly what we're seeing with Magnus Protocol, where the fears have, my theory of they've fractured into smaller pieces. They're now able to stretch closer to each other than they were before, maybe. I don't know. Just something I thought was really interesting. The Buried and the Vast have a really strange relationship together, kind of in the same way that the Desolation and the Dark do, right? Ultimately, it's up to you as to which one's which. I think the people that said it was the Buried are probably closer to right than I was when I said it was the Vast, because, again, too close I cannot breathe, which would be water, drowning, you can't breathe. Those are kind of important to each other. But I do think it's really interesting how the Vast plays into drowning, and especially episodes 51 and 129 of Magnus Archives. I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on it, especially if you go back and listen to those as well. But ultimately, I really liked this episode. I thought it was really well written, and Protocol is giving me more reasons to go back and appreciate Archives, and Archives is giving me more reasons to go back and appreciate Protocol. So I love the two of them. The only thing that I will say is that the Magnus Archives wiki is a nice, wonderful green, which I used to make sure I had the right episode numbers for these. Hence why I said earlier that I couldn't remember every episode number. And the Magnus Protocol wiki is like white. Like, come on, guys, we gotta get that red in there. Come on now. Ultimately, I'm loving Magnus Protocol. I think this was a horrifying episode in many ways, though very different from the previous. And I am so looking forward to what's to come. We have another break coming with episode 20. When that comes out, we'll have another short break. And that is probably when we'll take a deep dive into the ARG, because we'll have some time there. And we've already done all the other fun Magnus videos I wanted to do. I really wanted to do an Infinite Craft video on Magnus Archives and try to find Magnus Archives. After like an hour, I finally got to Rusty. So eventually that video might come out and I'll edit it down to where it's fun, but I don't know, we'll see. All told, though, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below, and until next time, I've been Trey, this has been The Full Spectrum. Remember to always enjoy the full spectrum. Magnus Protocol.